Welcome to Moments, the podcast, where we have conversations that matter. Hi, everyone. My name is Vasia Makris, your host and founder of Moments, a creative agency bridging art, culture, and technology. Joined by my amazing co-host, HardArt, each week we host a live X space deep diving into hot topics that are shaping the Web3 ecosystem. Okay, third time is the charm. Let's kick this off. I don't want to delay any longer. I guess for those that are not familiar, although I see a lot of familiar faces in the room right now, I'm Vasia Makris, your host, and joining us is HardArt, my trusty co-host, who's been along for the ride since day one. Just to give a brief intro, I'm founder of Moments, a creative agency that focuses specifically on in the intersection of art, culture, and technology. We really focus on bridging various industries and creating these impactful moments and experiences. And we recently launched our podcast division because we wanted to really honestly have these important conversations like the one we're going to be having today, to talk about the community, give the community a space to really have these debates and grow these ideas together. And more importantly, we wanted to just keep our finger on the pulse and see what people were interested in talking about. I'm going to hand the mic over real quick to Milton to give himself a brief introduction. But up top is all the links to our previous spaces. We not only record these spaces, but we make sure we upload them to all the different streaming platforms because I think it's honestly really important to create this archive of information. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see how some of these conversations, including the one today, how they're going to age and, where we're going to be a few months and a few years down the line. So if you haven't already signed up, make sure to do so. We also have a newsletter that goes out each week just to give you some updates on what we're working on as an agency behind the scenes as well. And without further ado, Milton, go ahead. I'll hand you the mic for a quick intro.
Hey, if you're here with us the third go round, you really want to talk royalties. So good to see some familiar faces. I see Coldie's on stage with us. Brian Brinkman here, the food master who's often giving us great conversation on stage as well. Not shy to come up and say hello, as is Stephen Miller. Stephen Miller's here as well. So is Catalina. A lot of great speakers in the house too, and a lot of religious listeners like Jose Antonio is here. Yet one of our team members in the building, Defiant Squid, and Eddie Wharton. Thanks for showing up. I'm so glad you were able to join. I sent you a last minute invite, and I hope that you could come speak about your Royal Patron platform that you've built to try and reward, spotlight, highlight, and encourage royalties. Jennifer Pepin just stepped in. So great room. Very briefly, I am HardArt. You might know me as Milton. I've been a collector since late 2020. And I have also been on the community building side with meme coin projects like Turbo. And I've been privileged enough to work alongside Vasia for artist teams like Trevor Jones. I was a conference maxi at least last year. I'll probably be off the trail a little less this year. But really enjoying these conversations, keeping everybody up to speed on the latest and greatest in Web3 and keeping a finger on our pulse on important conversations like this royalty conversation that we've probably had a million times. But I think it's worth having again because we did see these go by the wayside, unfortunately, to a large degree. And I am hoping that somebody smarter than me in the room is a developer, somebody like Eddie, perhaps, that could help us see new light to the royalty conversation and maybe bring it back to life in some sense. So, yeah, excited to kick this one off.
And I also want to take a second to welcome Coldie to the stage. Coldie, thank you for joining us. I was reading through a couple of comments on this specific topic, and I loved yours. And you're obviously an OG artist in this space. You've been around through a lot of bulls and bears, and just grateful to have you on the stage. Grateful to get your take from your perspective. GM, how are you?
GM, I'm doing pretty well. I'm a little stuffy, but I'm feeling much better. It's kind of funny. I think Take 3 is probably the perfect name for this royalties talk because this does seem like the third round of many conversations. So I'm happy to be here, and there's a lot to dive into, and I'm excited to talk to some of these people in the crowd too.
Awesome. So without further ado, let's jump into it. For those not familiar, Milton and I typically select a specific tweet of the week that's gone a little viral, that has the community talking, and typically that has two sides of the conversation so that we can really come together and talk about it. And so this week, I was honestly surprised that royalties even came up, but I'm really happy they did. Claire Silver put out a tweet. It's pinned up top, but just to read it out very quickly, she said, "People will literally rather sad post their way to zero than bring back artist royalties. Royalties mean mainstream attention, media attention, institutional attention. Royalties mean trading, incentive for affordable collection, shared reward for success. It's so stupidly obvious." And there was a bunch of replies. She had over 57,000 views. Coldy, I really liked yours, and I'll give you the mic in a sec to maybe talk a little bit more about that. But actually, do you want to kick us off and tell us more about what your initial take was and what you wrote on the thread? Because I really loved it, and I'll pin it up top as well for people to take a look.
Oh man, you're putting me on the spot about what I said more than an hour ago. Yeah, first back, what I can say before you pin my tweet for me to reread is that it it keeps coming up over and over and over, this talk of royalties, and it's so incredibly important, more than just 10% of the cut goes to the artist. Like, I shouldn't say it like that, but the 10% means more than the money that is being exchanged. It's like literally the oil that like powers the pistons for the car that is the brain of the artist. And like there's a lube that is needed, right, for this train to work, right? And I think that there's been a lot lost over the last couple years where the royalties are zero, and that is just like, oh, that's just like okay, I guess, with the overall community, when in fact it's extremely hard. And I can speak as an artist, like, you put your heart and soul into something and it sells. And then if it is a good, especially if it's a series artwork and there's, interest in it, and the volume is happening and it's trading back and forth and back and forth, right there, we have just recreated the traditional art scene that we do not agree with, where in the trad art world, you sell a piece of art, you get paid, and then that art disappears and you don't get a piece of it ever again. And that is not why I came here. I mean, I came here to share my art no matter what, but I came in here in 2018 when no one gave a shit about buying art. It was another way for me to share my art, and it was fun. And one of the main things, probably the most main thing that really cemented me wanting to be a part of this, is the royalties, because that allows an artist to benefit from their own success throughout history. And without that, we become guinea pigs in a wheel where we keep running and we keep producing, and that is not how we don't get the benefit along the way. I don't know. I'll stop there and we can talk about that.
No, that was great. And honestly, I always thought of it as the principle of it, kind of like you mentioned. I didn't actually stop and think. And I think I was reading through a bunch of different threads, and someone mentioned like they lost out on about 300,000 in royalties because of it. And that number hit me like, oh my God, that's crazy. That's substantial. But I always looked at it from a just principle of it. Like, it makes sense. I mean, when we see it done in other industries, whether it's music or, anytime movies kind of replay and people getting certain kickbacks, I mean, it just makes sense that the person that's sitting there and putting in the time and effort to be building out their brand gets rewarded and incentivized, let alone to just continue to sustain themselves. But just, I don't know, I think the principle of it and also the opening line in the comment that you made on Claire Silver's tweet, you just said royalties are the reason the space took off. And I think that's also a very important angle to talk about. I mean, most people in mainstream, especially when, my experience in Web3 started more with Crypt Gallery and like talking to a lot of normal people that have no idea what the value of blockchain, and the one factor that you could explain, it doesn't matter the person's background, age, whatever, everyone understood and got royalties the second you mentioned it, and you were like, oh well, it's the first time that they could ever receive it. They got it. And so I think what Claire also mentioned in her tweet, like, it brought a lot of mainstream attention because of that. And once you take that out of the equation, I think it just, people lose the understanding and value of what we're building here. And so I think it just doesn't make sense from multiple angles, basically. Milton, I don't know if you have anything maybe you want to jump in and add as well, but
Yeah, I mean, I'm not as OG as Coldy, and I'm not an artist, so I don't eat off the royalties, but I'm with both of you in that when I came into Web3, I thought that was such a cool story to tell. You can talk to outsiders, and damn, it's hard to connect with them on this stuff to get them to understand any bit of it. But everybody that I spoke to could resonate that. You could tell that story about whether you were Leonardo da Vinci or Frida Kahlo or Pablo Picasso or any famous artist over the course of time. Just like Coldy mentioned, you sell a piece of art, you better get top dollar for it, because guess what? You ain't getting shit every time that changes hands over the course of time. And that could be for a lot more, especially for some of the artists I just mentioned that got more famous as their career went on. Some of them are even more famous posthumously, but their family's not entitled to any of this. So you could always tell that story, and people would gravitate to that and say, you know what, that's noble, that's novel, that's new, that's cool, that's something I could get behind. And it's so funny how everybody has, if we're in this room trying to start controversy, I don't think we're going to start it today. A lot of times we want to start poking the bear a little bit and get both sides to talking, but everybody in our circle loves royalties, stands up for royalties. But then when it comes time to actually trade these items, we don't see these enforced often enough. And yeah, they went by the wayside. I think in 2021, as we all know, we had the PFP craze, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I think there was this conflation with PFPs and art, and they're a bit different in my opinion. And should they be honored in PFPs? It's debatable. That's more debatable to me than art. So yeah, I'm disappointed to see them go. I know we're going to talk today about some of the platforms that have kept them alive, which is good to see. And we got some cool people in the room. As I mentioned, Eddie Wharton is here, and Eddie's got a platform called Royal Patron that he's building to, show positive light on royalties. Those that are choosing to pay them, yes, they're still out there. There was some tweets I was just looking at where Hatzka traded a secondary was traded of his artwork, and both the buyer and seller chose and had that discussion, which I think is very healthy, to honor the royalties. These are good things to see. I found that through Eddie Wharton's repost of that. But yeah, I'd love to kind of transition there because Eddie is here on stage. I don't know how much time he's got to give. Like I said, I invited him last minute, so I'd love to hear his take on this as well. Eddie, if you got time, welcome to the stage.
Hi, thanks. And so just to echo, what people have said when we're talking about royalties, it is to me a really wonderful thing that got me excited about the space to see, artists having a share in their, in the value they create kind of longer term. And I actually remember speaking with an artist who said, I'm an artist, I don't have a 401k, but, I have royalties that hopefully, my kids might be able to get. And so, I definitely care a lot about the stakes here. But one of the things, and while royalties are certainly down, is that they aren't gone. And so, at least not within the art world. And so, when you look, it can range a lot for different collections, but it's pretty, seeing things in the 10% of people paying full royalties up to 50, 60%, depending on the collection. People still do pay full royalties, and that's within art. Within the PFP world, it is much, much lower. And You know, um, we are certainly losing out on a lot, and sometimes the absolute dollar amounts can still be very large, but it's not gone in art. And when you think about, art is pretty social, and so people in art, like, they also connect their Twitters and their Farcasters and their social identity to their wallets at way higher rates. And so when I've sometimes done analysis of collectors, it's actually the bigger collectors are way more likely to self-identify. They're also more likely to pay royalties. And so for all of the challenges and all that we're missing, to me, I don't think hope should feel gone at all when you still see people are paying royalties. And it's really a pain to track this stuff. And it's a bit complex when you have the seller instead of the buyer. Hello?
Yeah, I don't know what happened there, but
Oh,
Eddie,
Sorry, I think I hit the
okay.
button. My bad, Eddie.
oh,
Please continue. That's my fault.
oh, no,
Sorry, guys.
no sweat. Um, but when you look at the people who do pay, yeah, I think these are the sellers. This is with no reward. This is in the depths of what has been a challenging, at least, market for art right now. And so I think that if we see um, some more of a cultural stoking of this, kind of putting some logs on these embers, I think we'll see more. And so we can talk about some of the possible solutions. But I think that as just an opening message, I would say hope should not feel lost, even though I understand that it is discouraging. I understand that people have missed out on substantial sums, but there is still, I think, collector interest. And so I think this is something we can build on. So I'm happy to talk more, but,
Yeah. No, I'm with you, Eddie. And I definitely think like the purpose of the space today, at least from my perspective, was really to emphasize that. Like, I don't necessarily think hope is lost. I do think we need to have the conversation. And it's more of like a cultural movement of, emphasizing the importance of why royalties are important, not just for artists, but for even PFP communities, in my opinion, and for the ecosystem as a whole to grow. And I think hopefully once people understand why they're so important, for all of us to sustain this industry and protect our own investments, if you want to look at it from more of a selfish quote unquote perspective, hopefully they see the value in honoring the royalties. And I would love to hear a little bit more about what you're building. I've never heard of the platform, but I want to definitely hear a little bit more about how you guys are trying to protect and enforce kind of royalties for artists.
Yeah. And so the starting point is thinking, royalties and in general, like collecting, you want to be win-win. And I think royalties is a perfect example of how it can really align the interests of collectors and artists. And the thing that doing at Royal Patron is going into the data and helping either artists, platforms, managers, galleries, helping them identify who their patrons are, and then being able to acknowledge or reward them. And so that includes royalty payers, and that is certainly one of the things that we track, but also recognizing that there are multiple ways of being a patron, and people will define that differently. And so it's been pretty flexible in how we've worked. And so, for example, I worked with the generative artist Harvey Rayner, who did a release for his project Noodles, and he had, it was on Shape, big generative collection, and so there was a public price of 0.1 ETH, but for his top collectors, so his top holders, as well as anybody who'd paid him full royalties within the last year, they got a bigger discount. They got a 40% discount. And then all of his holders, even if they weren't in the top, they got, a 20% discount. And we saw that some of the people who were no longer holders did actually mint again, and they didn't sell. And it was like a reward for them paying royalties. And we saw like some increase in the rates of people paying him royalties. And there was a couple of cases of like some dude paid, they'd paid a couple of dollars on like a Martha mesh, like something that had sold on secondary, and they'd chosen to honor royalties on that, and they ended up minting a lot of noodles, like 20 or 30, and I ended up saving them like I'm trying to look for the number. It's like $1,000 to $3,000, something in that range. And the idea is to have a positive win-win story and to see that there were already people paying and to get more of that. And so that was one example we've worked on.
So essentially, I just want to make sure I understood. You guys are able to provide the tools and the data for artists to be able to essentially incentivize collectors that are either holding or incentivizing different behavior, like honoring the royalties, and you guys are able to, they integrate your tool to basically get that information for their collector base, right? Is that
Exactly.
okay?
Exactly.
Awesome.
Exactly.
Great. Okay. Yeah, that's something Milton and I were also kind of discussing, prior to this space, like how do you get, because obviously, and Coldy mentioned, like certain platforms are still implementing, Super Rare, Nifty Gateway, Nympha, a lot of the big ones are still honoring royalties. I think the problem more becomes, if people choose to move it off of that platform and start trading or, selling through something like OpenSea, where it's not necessarily enforced, then it's up to the collector. How do you either incentivize collectors to stay on the platform or incentivize them to honor that? So that's a very cool tool. I don't know if you wanted to share another example. I didn't mean to cut you off there, but feel free.
No, I appreciate you asking the question, and I understand the people kind of want to enforce it everywhere, and if there was a button you could just press, I wish that was the case, but I think that it's not really feasible because it would require new contract standards that could never work for stuff that's already been created. And for anything that is new, that has a new contract, it ultimately requires the cultural acceptance of, are people willing to buy an asset that they feel is a lot more restricted? And so I think the best thing to do is to basically just make people want to pay royalties or want to be on your platform, and then they will. And if you turn it into, I think, an adversarial cat and mouse game, I think you've kind of already lost. Whereas, if you get people to want to pay, or at least you don't give them strong reasons not to, and there's going to be an audience for it. And I'm a lot more bullish about this being feasible within the art world than PFPs. Not to say I don't care about that. Just when I look at what I see as behavior, I already see people doing that.
Can I ask real quick, do you
Yeah.
think that there's any, how do you think from your perspective might be the best way to incentivize or get people to want to honor royalties? Has there been anything that you guys have seen or have used even that has kind of gotten people to want to do that?
Yeah, well, I think that having some sort of reward, and it can be very small and social, and I think sometimes merely just the acknowledgement, I think can have an effect. And so that's kind of been the thesis, but I also think that it's going to be a vastly easier thing when the market is better and when you have releases that have a lot more demand and supply. And the truth is, there's very few artists who really are in a position where are going to want to not, and like releases where, an allow list. Most people, if somebody's willing to buy something, you don't really want to restrict that. There often is not a large enough demand excess right now, and there are cases, and happy to work with any artists and platforms that find themselves in that. But I think that as the market picks back up, you can also imagine things like, I actually think that instead of just having artists being the ones to do this, is having the galleries and the platforms and the ones who are doing multiple releases, who kind of have these longer term relationships with collectors. I think it'd be cool if they were giving them first dibs on stuff and giving them maybe preferential access. When you see things like, hey, saying sold in pre-sale for one of those things, it was a really hot release. I feel like, you want to have these kind of lists of, here are your top collectors, your top patrons, and you can define that a few ways. Maybe they're the people who've, mint stuff and buy more recently. Maybe the people that pay royalties. And I think then they kind of end up enforcing a little bit culturally these norms of, hey, if you do these good things and you're kind of acting positive sum and longer term for the space, then it's going to come back to you. And so, I've spoken with a few platforms about various ideas, and I did one with worked with Transient Labs, and we basically made lists of their collectors, and they did a release last December to reward the people who have collected, and ultimately, I actually ended up creating an artwork as part of that with the data, and we decided to actually make the release mechanism simpler so that I could focus on the actual data artwork. But I think it's an idea that we talked about them and with others about being able to build these different patron lists so that when there is something that's desirable, you have a list of people you can go to.
So important, I think, having that information. And you did mention collector relationships. I do want to, Coldy, if you want to jump in, because I know that's something that we had spoken about briefly prior. And I know Julia, give me 1 second. I do see your hand up, but Coldy, let's talk more about the collector relationship and how important that is.
Yeah, and first of all, Eddie, high five. This is awesome to hear, and um, you are helping solve a lot of the thoughts that I know myself and many of the artists in this space, even in this room right now, have been arduously trying to figure out. So I think it's again, it's the community is how we make this a reality, right? So Eddie, awesome. We will talk more for sure. One of the things that you said, one of your first lines, was that this is a social space that we're in. And I've always gone back to the idea of smart contracts versus social contracts. And social outside of even social media, it's the social like acceptance and what is right. And there is uh, being able to think higher than what is demanded of you, I think is something that has in some ways shifted in terms of maybe the collector base. Um, I mean, I'll just be blunt. I mean, there's a way more gambling addicts in here than there used to be. So, when you want to really break it down, I think we're in a growth phase where we have people in here who are posturing and saying, I love art. Okay, well, it kind of all falls apart when you say, well, you want to support the artist? And like, no. Like, oh, wow, cool. You must really love art. Um, so I think that is something that we have to live with right now. Like that is where we're at. These are, the people who are supporting us, and I appreciate that. But I also think that as we grow, myself, I've been. It's funny. I just found out the first mint date. I'm so bad with my dates. So May. It was May, I forgot already. May 7th, 2018 was my first mint, and since that day, I have on that day, I met my first digital art collector, and we still talk to this day. And we don't even talk about the art that he owns. We're just friends. And that has perpetuated out for whatever 7 years. And that has created my own like manual version of what Eddie is working on getting data for, where I know my patrons and I know who has, you know, paid royalties. I know who hasn't. And I also know, and I just had a conversation recently with one of my big collectors who is, he hit me up. He's like, hey, man, I'm, looking to move a piece. These people are all so nice. And they're like, don't worry. I'm obviously going to pay royalties. And it's so beautiful because I don't expect anything from anybody. And you know, but it's ingrained in them that that is what you do. And over time, it's like Pavlov's dog, right? You got to reward, you got to just be there and like incentivize and say, yes, good job, yes. And then when they tell their friends that collect that this is the way it works, then that's a truth, right? They don't have to be like investigate it, right? They're like, yeah, so you buy the digital art and then the artist gets 10%. They'll be like, okay. it's not that hard. We just have to have it be real so that it lives forward. Besides that, you got to have a good relationship. I mean, if you're a good person and you talk to your collector and you're nice, there's a 99 more percent chance that you're going to get royalties just by being a good person and also making good art. But like, walk the walk, and then you'll probably, there's more chance you're going to get more back from that. So I think, you know, community is huge. I mean, we have Brinkman in the crowd who's like king community. There's a lot of people in here who are just super extremely talented at what they do. They have a great reputation, and your reputation precedes you. And that is, I think, the cornerstone to all of this.
Yeah, I'm so with you. I feel like that's the recurring theme in a lot of the conversations we've had and just how important those relationships are. And honestly, the way that I looked at this whole royalties conversation is it's almost like those stores that are like the self-checkout stores and like there's no one policing the door and it's like walk in, grab what you want, pay for it and walk out. And it's like it's just a trust system. And most people in the real world would probably rob like that store blind. But like you're saying, if you have these relationships and the store owner, for example, you're not going to just walk out. You might actually feel a type of way. So I definitely think it's all about the relationship building and, not just for royalties, but just, growing your career and really building out the correct community. And absolutely, and Brian just requested, I was about to shout him out as well. I'm completely with you. I'm going to bring Brian on stage, but Milton, I see your hand up. What are your thoughts on the convo so far?
No, I'm 100% with Goldie. We were talking about it earlier about starting controversy. Maybe I have my one controversial take. You talk about social contracts. I like the idea that Goldie brought up, talking about smart contracts versus social contracts. And, when I got into this space, I made friends with quite a lot of the artists, which was also pretty unique. I felt like there was more of a human connection. I don't know the trad art world, but I just feel like there were more gatekeeping, more walls, and it was more stuffy. So my question is, we've got lots of positive examples of artists who have. There was this social contract, if you will, that hey, I'm here. I'm going to sell a bunch of art, release a bunch of art, make connections, and I'm going to stay in this space and keep producing. Not everybody has. Not every artist has met that end of their social contract. So I'm a collector here with lots of art that I love, lots of artists that I've connected with. I also have art in my collection where artists have disappeared. They have publicly walked away from digital art. And I'm left with the degen term bag. Coley was talking about that earlier. There was lots of degens in this space, more than there were. I mean, I was one of them, don't get me wrong. So perhaps I had the wrong perspective coming in. But if I'm on the way out selling a piece from somebody who hasn't really honored their end of the bargain, would I be frowned upon for not honoring 10% royalties? I'm curious to hear that take. Maybe that's something we don't talk about very much, but would I be a bad boy? Would I be kicked out of the Cool Kids Club if I chose not to pay 10% royalties to those artists? I'm just curious. But that's a side note. We've got great artists here that have been waiting patiently to say hello. So I know Julia, Sky, and Plotsky were on stage, and Brian is joining us. So I want to hear from all of them. Julia, I think, has been waiting the longest. Maybe you can chime on that briefly, but I'm sure you got other great contributions to the conversation. Julia, what's going on? Julia, Sky.
Hey, good to talk to you guys. I just wanted to respond to first. I'll respond to your question. I just wanted to kind of bounce off of what Coldy said earlier about just what was I saying? Oh my God, guys. I was like, oh yeah, that you need to amplify like good behavior. I think that's what really struck to me the most about how we tend to talk about, the gossip or the bad and the negativity and we complain. But I really do feel like if we want to start a movement with royalties, we really got to be putting these collectors up and posting them and just being like, wow, look at this collector, like we really, because then I think that'll start a wave, to be honest. It starts with the artists, how we treat people, how people treat us. We gotta, instead of the clout chasing or whatever, chasing, people that are not, supporting us with the royalties that we want. We should just be embracing the collectors that are really trying to push that forward and put them in the forefront rather than chasing the ones that are already, kind of taking us for granted kind of sense. I think we should be uplifting like younger collectors that are just starting, because they're really fighting for us, but people tend to look at people who are already higher above them rather than people that are just growing, and you never know who's going to end up where at some point in their life. So I think it's important to just uplift the good behavior, talk about it, stop being so silent, and focus on the people that are really trying to break the cage. And I had this idea, I don't know, it's like I like the idea of rewarding collectors. Maybe like the collector, like for instance, there's a collector, he collects your piece, he sells it to another curator. Maybe give that collector a royalty and the curator a royalty. Make it like a split royalty system so that with each sale, they're incentivized to keep going, and like maybe like a little gift or something. People love giving and receiving. I think it's important to give and receive. Give a gift. The little small gestures are the most meaningful. Like it could be a tiny little thing like that's not worth much, monetary wise or materialistically, but spiritually it means love or the most to someone. So I think we really got to dive deep into just spirituality and love, and like look beyond the materialism and the spirituality of giving and receiving, and an ebb and flow kind of manner between collectors and artists that feels like love, honestly. Yeah, like true, just like joy and appreciation for each other rather than like the strive for like, I don't know, power, I guess. Just love, I think, is the answer. That's so cheesy, dude. But yeah, much love, guys. I'm heading to New York. I'm packing to take another leap of faith. Um, I'm bringing my song and trying to get into a door to ASCAP that I'm on a wait list. I don't even know if I'll get into this door, but we're going to just stand by it and see. So yeah, much love.
Julia, you crack me up. I hate to see you leaving the deli simulation, as you
Oh
call it,
no,
but
I'm not. No,
I
I'm
wish
I'm
you.
coming back to the deli.
Okay.
No, I'm coming back to the deli. The deli is amazing to me. It provides me with bread, water, milk, and Jesus and good vibes, dude. I work in the morning there. I'm coming back, networking with people way beyond me, but then I want to come back to the deli because it honestly brings me a sense of stability and peace. I went to Paris and it was insane, dude. It felt like I wasn't good enough or doing much, but I was. And in the end, I saw Brian. We hung out, talked. It was cool. I saw all the people that are just uplifting energy, but I also was faced with just the chaos of this feeling. So it's good to come back and like stabilize a bit. But now, leap of faiths are important.
Well, let me know when you're in New York, Julia, for sure. And thank you so much for all the
I'm
things you
coming
just...
today.
Oh, text me. We'll talk after.
Are you in New York?
Yes, I am.
I'm going to be in Midtown, dude. I'm staying by Central Park Gothic Bridge.
I was gonna say, don't tell people where you're staying on stage.
Shit, no, that's near
DM
there.
me.
It's
We'll
not...
talk. But thank you so much for all the things you just said on stage, because I think you brought up a lot of great points. Milton, I didn't want to cut you off because I did see your hand up. I think you had a direct response, so I'll let you take the mic.
A real quick response from Julia's take. I love what she said in that it could be super small. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. Eddie's talking about saving potentially thousands of dollars on a mint. That's freaking awesome. Don't get me wrong. But it could be so simple. Like I'm a pin collector now that I've gotten into Web3. I love rocking them and they're conversation starters. I got some of Brinkman's, for example. Like if I chose to pay royalties for Brinkman and then all of a sudden, unexpectedly, I think that would be really important too. Unexpectedly, like it was never guaranteed. It just happened. It happened as a surprise. A pin showed up in the mail. If I was willing to dox myself, this is Web3, we know. But I am. If I got a pin in the mail unexpectedly for choosing to pay royalties on a Brian Brinkman secondary, I just think that would be so cool and be such a small gesture. Brian likes to give those out in person. I think those are proof of appearance, physical tokens for him. But you get the picture. If any artist did something very small, it could be a postcard. I get postcards from Trevor and violet occasionally. They're just so special. I keep them on my fridge. Could be really, really simple. Julie, I love that message. I thought that was great.
Yeah, because I love little things and souvenirs and trinkets. Like for me, I don't really like, I love living under the means, and just like when my friend gives me something like, oh, I don't have like a mat for a toilet, like that stuff makes me happy, dude. It's the little things in life that bring joy. Or the best things in life are free sometimes. I like that phrase also.
Absolutely. And it goes right back to what Goldie was saying with those relationships. It's just creating those meaningful and standing out amongst the crowd as well. I do see some other hands, so let's share the mic. Plotsky, did you want to jump in and add on?
Yes. Hey, how are you guys doing? Sorry. I thought you were going to answer.
Hey,
No, doing good.
Doing good. Sorry.
Milton and I are both very rude, apparently. Thanks for asking. We're doing good. We needed a good laugh, so thank you for that. How are you?
Good. I'm probably going to be kind of a Debbie Downer. I don't know. Like what Colby posted, that royalties are the reason the space took off. Gosh, like if you came in after that time, I don't know if you could quite understand like the whole feeling that was there. That was revolutionary to artists. It was also, I mean, we had the time during the pandemic when so many artists like flooded into the space, and so much of it was just word of mouth. People were all together on Clubhouse, and bringing every day, there were new artists you would never expect to even be able to be in contact with, just coming in and learning. And it was because of royalties. And also, just how well NFTs were selling and a different way to sell your art. But the royalty part, I've spent hours, hundreds of hours telling people that, like in the past, that this is something you can pass down to your children. It doesn't even stop in your lifetime. And people, it was just incredible. Artists not only could have control of their own sales, but they were setting something up where they got rewarded, and then to be able to pass that on. And it was like, revolutionary. And that was something everyone thought was set in stone and couldn't be changed. And just because you can create something, doesn't mean you should. And the people that decided to open platforms where you could circumvent the royalties, it really, you can't really roll it back to how it was. Now, I remember a time when it would be unheard of to even want to sell an artist's piece for under their floor. Like, let's say you had something in your collection and you wanted to sell it, you needed to sell it, you would not sell for under that artist's floor. Sometimes artists would even reach out to people like, why did you do that to me? Which I don't know, that's kind of weird. But like, and then I do know people who would have large private sales, and when they did the sale, they would absolutely send the money to the artist, because even though it didn't, for some reason, go through the platform, maybe it was something extra anonymous or whatever, they sent that money, even if it was $20,000, like they sent it to the artist. And I don't know, people that were, when I'm buying things now, I would never not give the artist the royalty. But that's because I came from that time. If I came into the space today, I don't know if without having the conversations and without understanding, I don't know if I would do it. Like, I don't know, because you don't understand the promise that was made and why the artist did it this way. So it is, disheartening. I don't know how you could fix that. And yes, if you have a good relationship with your collectors, and if they were there for this, then they will probably still do it. But yeah, that's just my perception on it. Like, I don't think it can be, the only solution would be to only I don't know, like, I want to say only sell your art on a platform that enforces royalties, but then once it moves on, and that was the point of it. So Yeah,
You're not a Debbie
disappointing.
Downer. You're not a Debbie Downer. Although I do agree it is disappointing. And you're
Mhm.
right. I think it's more like the unwritten rules. And everyone in the very beginning, quote unquote, these were the rules. And I think
We
it's
were
a matter
making
of
something better. We were making something better, and it got ruined.
well, I think it's about kind of having these conversations and re-educating to an extent to make sure that people really understand the impact and impact that these royalties have. I did see Brian's hand shoot up while you were talking, Platsky, so I do want to give him the mic real quick since we haven't heard from Brian. I'm curious what his take on all of this is. Hey, Brian, GM, how are you?
Hey, GM. Can you guys hear me okay? Cool.
Gotcha, loud and clear.
Yeah, I'm just gonna pile on to Plotsky's doom posting. No, I don't know. This conversation, I dread it every 6 months when it comes back around, because it's so complicated and there's no easy solution. Um, I go back to why did it go away? And we can say the platforms. I think that's a part of it. I think the PFPs, they shouldn't have been taking 10% on everything. That was a huge extraction. And even, we try to put artists in this like safe bubble of, no, they did no wrong. But Nifty Gateway back towards, 2021, they incentivized huge open editions that did the same thing that PFPs did, whether it was with artists or DJs and all these other things. But shout out to Nifty Gateway. There's still a platform that enforces royalties. But so I think, this idea of going back, listening, I wanted to jump in because I love everyone that's talking and you guys are all making wonderful points. Separating collectibles from art, that's impossible because sometimes art is collectibles and vice versa. I don't think there's an easy way around that. I think this idea of incentivification, putting it on the artist, I think is detrimental because you can incentivize people paying royalties, but then you also have to concurrently incentivize people holding, and then in the end, it's just value coming out of the artist over and over and over. I think it comes back to the platforms. They're the ones that flip the switch. OpenSea, they're about to do this big XP thing. They could easily incentivize royalties to boost your XP and solve the problem, but they won't because whatever reasons. But it's kind of as simple as that in many ways. And, Julia's idea about collectors' royalties, Super Rare did that. And I thought it was really great. And we saw people like Pindar who sold a X copy to a collector and then it resold to another collector. He got like 3% of that next thing, which ended up being a huge amount of money because X copy stuff sells for a lot. So I do think that's a cool thing that should be implemented more than just within Super Rare. HardArt mentioned sending stuff to collectors. Pindar, again, sends postcards to anybody that pays royalties, and I think that's a lovely sentiment. I don't think it's enough to encourage people that need money to not take the money, but it's a nice sentiment. And then one aspect I think we have to be realistic about is percentages. 10%. I don't think that's realistic anymore unless it's with an open edition on, say, Super Rare. Something that only flips once every year or two, 10% makes sense. When it comes to limited editions, it should probably be 5%. If it's a big open edition or a big collection, it should probably be like 2.5%. We have to get more realistic to the fact that if we expect people to give us a tip, it should be a tip that is in line with what they're willing to give. And so, I'm all over the board here, but hopefully this kickstarts some discussion.
Hey, Brian, I love that, man. I've thought about that exact scenario. That's some notes I had when Vasia and I were discussing this episode about percentages and what's realistic. And it's kind of like you go to the barista now and they flip the screen around and they expect you to pay 22%. You're like, wait, you just poured me a coffee that was a drip coffee that you did nothing for. Like, why would I do that? But if you're my server for a steak dinner, hell yeah, I'm going to tip you 20%. I was there for 3 hours, had a bottle of wine, 3-course meal and dessert. Like, there are different tipping scenarios. And I wasn't even sure if tipping was the right analogy to make, but since you said it, I'm going to say it. So I really do like that perspective. And I think there's again, this social contract that Coldy alluded to, that we could have. We're still a pretty small space, and pretty intimate. Like, I think these conversations could be had amongst artists and collectors where we have such great lines of communication in general, where we could say, hey, this what percentage makes sense here on this collection? And yeah, it should fluctuate, in my opinion. So
Yeah.
I
Well,
just want to piggyback on
going
that.
back to the social contract, me and Coldy both know back when royalties were a thing, people still got around paying those royalties. It was always an option. And so, there's no way to truly enforce it because there will always be over the counter options.
Yeah, there's always going to be secondary trading that could happen behind closed doors that nobody knows anything about. And so you'll never be able to stop it. But yeah, I think there's good ways to incentivize it. Eddie's part of the crew that's helping to do that and exalt. And just one more thing I thought about, Julia Sky mentioned earlier, was exalting collectors. I remember being in the space, and the artists were really getting the praise, and deservedly so. They were the pioneers that took all the risk on their back to produce this art and kind of put themselves out there. But there were less emphasis on collectors, and I think people like Vasia and King of Midtown should be praised for efforts that they did. I remember not even knowing what to call myself early in the days, and collector I finally figured out was my title. But Vasia and Tommy, for instance, at the physical locations of their galleries in LA and New York, had dedicated areas for collectors. Specifically in New York, had 4 screens dedicated to collectors full time. And then in LA, I was the recipient of a chance to win a spot to showcase my art as a collector. And then I had a QR code to my personal profile, and that just felt so special to me. And it was different than what I see most of in this space, which is mostly artist focused. And God, we all love the artists, don't get me wrong. But it's good to see that love go around a little bit to the collectors too. So I'm sure Eddie's got something to chime in there. I see Eddie's hand up forever. So thanks for being patient. And then Andres, I see your hand up as well. So we'll get to you shortly. But Eddie, go ahead and chime in, man.
No, I really appreciate all the comments and the discussion on this, and I definitely agree with Brian that it's not realistic or sustainable or practical for it to always be on artists. And I also think that it can't be always be these large things. I think the small stuff, exactly like Julie was saying, can sometimes be even the most meaningful. And I think we're kind of just in this in between space where, I mean, right now, the whole industry, digital art is not, it's challenging. I mean, platforms are closing. There's not as many collectors. And I think that royalties is honestly reflects some of that. And I think will probably has the potential to come back as that does. And, to the point about there being these, getting this social contract instead of the smart contract, exactly to the point about there's always the possibility for OTC. And so you really need to get, you have the smart contracts and the tech can really influence it. But at the end of the day, there still has to be the social. And, tipping is certainly not a perfect analogy in a lot of ways to royalties. But I think there are a few important, there is a very important thing in which that tipping is purely a social construct. And at least in the US, if you go to a restaurant, it'd be almost unthinkable to have a meal and to leave and not tip anything. And there was actually decades of culture war over this before it kind of settled into the current. And now I understand this, the tip creep in the other areas and other types of services. But it's not impossible though for there to be a social consensus. And I think things, be it bigger gestures that kind of become maybe some of the lore and the legend and that kind of imprint the value and the importance on people, or things, the smaller things, the more personal stuff. And when you look at like tipping, it's very influenced. At the end of the day, if somebody could tip or not. But when you look at the tech about what is the default percentage and do they make it easy or not, it does influence it. And so it's not to say that I don't think the tech or the smart contracts have an effect. It's just that at the end of the day, it needs a social buy-in. And I also realized I wanted to just mention there's a few other platforms, artists that have all done stuff around royalties, and I just wanted to quickly shout them out. And so Article, they're a platform that they're basically have points, and I agree with I think it was Brian who said that OpenSea would be wonderful to see them rewarding collectors with points, but Article does do that, and they do look at royalties for that art blocks. They have deals with OpenSea to basically enforce royalties across the art blocks engine, which dramatically increase the amount of royalties for all art blocks engine collections. And Nifty actually just announced today with Sam, or rather, I heard Sam talking in a space today that they're going to be having a royalty. That they already enforce royalties on their platform, but for Masquerade, it sounded like Sam was saying there's going to be a new system where if people sell a mask at a loss, then they don't pay any royalties. It'll be dynamic. And, HardArt, you'd mentioned, hey, if you feel like the artist or the creator didn't kind of live up to the social contract, how you feel about not paying royalties. And it's something I hear a lot about people who mixed reactions, but some people really don't feel as good about paying royalties, even to artists, if they sell something at a loss. And so Nifty was talking about doing this, Sam was talking about doing this rather with Nifty on Masquerade. So it would be no royalties if it's, I think, at a loss, and there's some sort of sliding scale up to a 2x of it goes up to 10%. And it sounded like it would be 10% after that. And of course, people could just opt out. They could, withdraw the mask or do an OTC deal. But I thought that was interesting. There's also a bunch of artists. Brian mentioned Pindar, who does those cards. Hafka sometimes gives shout outs to the collectors who pay. And I mean, Matt Cain had some brilliant airdrop, this whole collection he did kind of around the people who paid royalties. And so, I just wanted to, and then, Super has been doing stuff for a long time where they enforce it, and they have the collector royalties. I'm sure there's a lot of other interesting stuff, but I just wanted to call out a few of the things that were on my radar.
Eddie, thank you so much for sharing all of that. And actually, I wasn't aware of the Sam spread and how they were structuring that. But that's a huge, I think, an interesting point, the selling at a loss. It was something I was going to mention as well, and just see how people felt about that in general. Like, what are people's takes? And I don't know if, Andres, I do see your hands up. Maybe you want to jump in, but that was something that I just wanted to emphasize and throw out if someone did want to comment back as well. But Andres, thank you so much for joining the stage. I would love to hear what your thoughts on all of this are.
It's a pleasure to be here, guys. A pleasure to be in such esteemed company. I'm not joking about that, even though I did a stupid voice. I think that I'm just going to be straight forward with this as possible, that royalties were and continue to be, to some extent, though they are incredibly kneecapped, what separates crypto art, right, from the fine art world, right? And I agree with Eddie. I'm sorry. HardArt is the tipping culture is that you're comparing fruit. Like it's not the same. But the thing with royalties was that the royalties do a couple things. I think number one is it's this huge hard line in the sand of this is the new version of the art world going forward. An artist who has an old piece that they sold gets resold, whether it's at a loss or for profit, a part of that goes back into their pockets. Right, which already a part of that also goes back into the pockets of the platforms, as we all know, right? But I do find that whenever royalties are honored, it's this thing where it's free press. It's free press for the collector. It's free press for the artist. It's wonderful. It's screamed from the rooftop, and then people go, huh? It creates goodwill amongst any element of culture. To say that right, well, okay, so these artists that created this object of culture that we may be, deciphering and picking for however many potentially centuries, right? So this person and their estate continually gets paid all the time. So for me, it's kind of a hard line in the sand. It's this is what separates you from a Christie's, right? This is what separates you from anything. And yes, of course, there's backdoor deals all the time, right? There are backdoor deals now to get past platform fees. Right, that happens. It happens on every level. I don't know how we go back, except for platforms that specifically, say we honor royalties. Super Rare being one of them. I know 01, right, is another one. Some that honor royalties are specifically off Ethereum. Right, I find that Ethereum is the platform where it seems to be this big confusion about, do we have royalties? Do we not have royalties? Can we bring them back? Do we not? And there's other platforms that get to answer that question and go, actually, we honor them completely. So that creates competitive nature. I came up to the platform mostly because, Brian, I was curious why there would be a diminishing scale for editions in like I don't know, I don't remember where you said that that's offered, but like a diminishing scale of royalties for editions. I'm still confused why, right? When we're talking specifically about fine art, it's like, to me, it's still 10% and 10%. Maybe I'm uneducated and ignorant, but I'm just I get confused if like 10% of 0.1 is 0.01. I get lost as to why that would be a problem.
Yeah. The idea comes from volume. If you're selling 100 pieces a day rapidly, so like Jack Butcher, for instance, checks, should that be, royalty at 10%, or because he sells, 1,000 of them, should it be less so that it keeps incentivizing people moving it around? Because at a certain point, people will game the system like they did Bored Apes. Should a 10,000 Bored Apes have a 10% royalty, or should that have been a 2% royalty? I think that's kind of where it comes down to, is like the rate of flipping and volume offsets the diminishing percentage, and in the end encourages more movement and encourages people to continue to pay the royalties.
I'm with that. And yeah, I just wanted to touch on that too. Just if you think about just a real simple numbers sake example, just selling a 1 of 1 and it moves for 1 ETH on the secondary, you take 10%, you get 0.1 ETH. If you have an edition of 10 and they sell for 0.1 each, assuming they're going to trade at roughly equal values, then you're going to end up with the same 10% 0.1 ETH at the end of the day. So yeah, the volume makes sense to me. I'm a big editions collector, and like Brian said, there were times that the times luckily aren't here as much anymore, but there were times when there was massive open editions. I have quite a few of them, and you can look at the secondary volume on those collections. They are huge in some cases. So would paying a little bit less on royalties mean the same for the artist? Like, yeah, it would, because the turnover is so high. So I could see that. And I think that would be just an interesting conversation to have as an artist. Maybe that would spark an interesting conversation and some attention to you if you're willing to be flexible. I think collectors, I would appreciate that if you had a poll, said, hey, I'm going to have an edition of 100 coming out. Like, what should the royalties be, since that's a hot topic at the moment? And have a poll and see what it is. And then people are buying in, knowing that they actually had a say in that. This collector share, this shared conversation, I think, is so important. So yeah, I'm with Brian on that one. And Eddie, like, this dynamic one sounds very interesting to me. Andres, what's your take on that?
I know, Plotsky, do you want to go ahead of me, since I know that you've had your hand up? I apologize. It's up to you, but I can do the take after.
Sure. I was just going to say something quick. I understand the conversation about different ways to handle it now is necessary. And like everyone's opinions, I agree with these different ideas. So with what I'm going to say, I'm not directing it at that, because I'm sure everyone here, if we could go back and everything would be enforced completely, everyone would be cool with that. So we're talking about solutions. But definitely the intention of this was that, like, definitely these are not tips. These are definitely things that the artist has in their contract that they felt was going to be enforced indefinitely. So in my opinion, if your art is necessary, obviously, but not necessary as a human being to live, like food, shelter, right? If you have the money to collect art and you decide to bypass the royalties to an artist, like, you're garbage. That is terrible. That is the contract, and you're stealing. Because if that is in the artist's contract and that was the intention of how they wanted to sell their art, no one has to do it digitally. No one has to do it on chain. And if they did and you bypass it, you're garbage. So
Preach, Plotsky, preach.
But how do you really feel, Plotsky? Don't hold back. How do you really feel about it?
Thank you.
You're not lying. Thank you. I like that polite ending. You're not lying though, and it's I think the worst part was the fact that these were contracts. Like they were already minted and released works, and all of a sudden it's like, just kidding, you're not going to get the royalties, or the royalties are not guaranteed. And I think that was the most like savage part of the entire thing with Blur and OpenSea and everything that kind of happened. Like I don't know. It was just, Andres, I'll give you the mic to kind of continue the conversation with what you had mentioned before. I don't know if you agreed with Brian after he kind of re-explained that, but I would love to hear your take on it.
No, Vasia, Plasky, you guys both. That's why I gotta hand the mic off to the ladies. Just better takes. I don't know what to say about anything. Just more quality. This was yeah. Anyway, I'm done patting my back for pressing the mute button on myself. I still don't understand. I don't have to. I just don't really still don't understand the sliding scale outside of a. I like the idea of HardArt. Like I love the idea of connecting with an audience and being like, look, here's this collection, and if you guys, what percentage of royalty should we take? Because it allows people to participate in the discussion on this art that they care about and artists that they care about. I think that is really cool. But I still personally don't understand the sliding scale, mostly because we come down to the crux of the issue, right? Outside of OpenSea, outside of Blur, is like how to this strange thing of somehow it's very hard to differentiate because the marketplace doesn't differentiate the difference between selling a PFP project, right? Bored Ape, which is what started this whole thing, right? Is Bored Apes and Punks, all that, and the 10% royalties of that and the bloat of that versus a fine artist, right? Be they, AI sculptor, painter, illustrator, whatever, who is like, potentially building an entire, they're building a life for themselves. Eventually they're going to potentially leave behind an estate. Right. And I see this all the time. You can see it in modern day where you have these estates, right? Let's say the Basquiat estate, right? The Basquiat estate has to now, they have the ability, but they are forced into a corner where they have to, put on shows with the remaining works that are in the family and also potentially be licensing, the Basquiat name out to products in order to continue to profit off of the estate itself, which I find just to pay for legal fees, just pay for lawyers, just to run this whole business. So this is my fiance. This is Adina. See, ladies have the better takes, but it's just to keep the whole thing running, right? It's like otherwise the estate kind of disappears, and then you have the artworks and the name run through talking about honoring collectors and collections. The artworks are left in the collections of these other people, right? That now hold this artist's name. The promise of this whole place was that you would be able to actually create an estate, kind of like how musicians have been able to create an estate. And again, I keep coming back to like, there's precedent. It may be apples to orange. We may be comparing fruit, but there is this thing of like, I just find, again, it's like how Vasia said and how Pulaski said, it's like the price was on the can, like it was already part of the contract. And that's what's so difficult about the conversation that we're having is like, what do you do? Do you wait until OpenSea and Blur die out? Do you trust that, do you trust the platforms that exist to continue doing their thing, right? The ones that continue to honor, or do you move to a new chain entirely? Because you're leaving room. An art chain is essentially leaving room for other art chains to take over eventually, right? And it already is happening, right? Whether it's AVAX or obviously Tezos or anything, is like they're angling. They're like, yes, and guess what? We have an art chain. You might sell for more, you might sell for less. There's a group of collectors here, and we honor your royalties. And you're like, oh, wait a second. Like, should I be even running on Ethereum right now? Like, is that, as an artist, is that smart for me, for my longevity, right? Do I completely cut off the things I'm releasing on Ethereum now and move on to another chain and potentially, I still see no issue of like, creating small works for that chain and eventually putting up works for the same dollar amounts that you would have placed on another chain. These are the kind of things that I feel like, what is it? It's a phrase I heard today that was really cool. It's like when the king, let's replace king with platform. When the king poisons the air of the common people, they poison their own air. And that's something that I've felt for a long time with like an OpenSea and a Blur, is that, you kind of just signed your own, like eventually someone will be using a different platform because you no longer have that incentive, and you've just given other platforms that eventually someone will find the people and the group with the right backing to be able to enforce what is no longer being enforced. So that's where I sit on it personally.
No, all great takes. And actually, that's a very strong quote. I love that you just shared that. I'm curious what everyone has to say about this, but personally, I feel like, yes, you can switch platforms, you can go somewhere else, you can switch chains, and people talk about object and Teslas and whatever. But aside from the fact that I feel like they're not comparable for other reasons, I also think maybe it's my trust issues, but it's like, what's stopping them from one day doing the same exact thing? And it's essentially you're not in full control. And I feel like the solution, although it's going to be a much longer kind of solution, it's going to take time and I think more work, but I really believe it's changing the culture, and it's really embedding the culture that we originally, why we gravitated toward Web3, because that to me is a lot harder to change versus a platform. And what happened with OpenSea and Blur, I mean, those were a couple of people behind closed doors having conversations that dictated and changed the landscape of the entire industry. And so changing chains or marketplaces and eventually running the risk of experiencing the same thing is, I don't know, it doesn't sit so well with me. Versus, I think more grassroots and coming from the community and really having these types of discussions and okay, trying to figure out ways to incentivize and support and really reward, like Coldy originally mentioned, like rewarding the right behavior. I think if we embed it and new people that we bring in here, we continue to embed it, for me at least, that's going to stand the test of time a little bit longer. And that type of infrastructure, I think, is going to lead to a more successful route that doesn't leave the power in one or two people. It kind of diversifies it across the community, which for me at least creates more of a strong solution. But I'm curious what everyone else has to say to this. If anyone else wants to jump in, any other takes? Milton, I'm going to put you on the spot. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's tough to like make the analogies. I think, we used the word tip earlier. In a sense, I do see it as a tip, honestly. And like maybe that should be more. Maybe I should have the opportunity to offer more than 10%. You know what I mean? Because maybe the artist went to such a crazy degree of promotion and self-growth and traveling the world and getting themselves out there and marketing and doing all the right things that I'm able to sell my art. There is some of want from me to want to be able to sell my art, probably to buy more art. But if the artists were going to do that work, I'd be willing to pay more in some cases. But I do think the sliding scale is interesting because I think looking at my own collection, there are things if I sold, I almost wouldn't want a single penny to go to the artist because they did me dirty in a lot of ways, I feel, because it was that unspoken social contract where we were in this new paradigm. I felt like this creator was here for the long haul. They indicated that online, in person, and then walked away. So there are things in my wallet, in my collection that I look at, and I feel like maybe it's not justified. But I understand the estate argument. I understand where Andres is coming from. I understand that it was coded in a sense, although I'm not smart enough or tech savvy enough to know. But I don't believe it's coded in most of the smart contracts themselves, which is why you can skirt the royalties on certain platforms like OpenSea or Blur. So yeah, I think it's going to be back to, I keep going on what Coldy said because I really like it, is the social contract. I think it's going to be something that Eddie's doing, which is rewarding, something that many of the artists like were mentioned, Pindar, for example, doing just these small gestures. Julius Guy mentioned that small gestures go a long way. It's the small things in life that bring us joy. So yeah, it's a complicated issue. It really is. But I think it would be nice to have conversations like this where everybody's in agreement that this was something extremely special about Web3, and it should be exalted. It should be shown. It should be spoken about. It should be highlighted. It should be praised. It should be rewarded. And there's some people doing a great job of that. I think we need more. Some people are doing a good job. Not everybody's doing a great job. I think we need more and more of that. So the more the better, in my opinion. But I see Andres and Julia's hands are up. I know I personally had a pretty hard stop. I can probably give a few more minutes past the 2:30 mark, hour and a half mark in. But we'll have to land the plane, quote unquote, not long after that. But Julia is still with us. So Julia, I'd love to hear from you. I'm sure Andres will willing to give the women with better takes the opportunity to chime in. And then Andres, I did see your hand as well, and you're welcome to jump in after that. We just got to try and wrap it up in the next 5 to 10 minutes max, I would say. Julia, go ahead.
I was just trying to like stir things up, and I just had a crazy thought. I was like, what if we do 100% royalties to the last collector that got it or something, so that like just give, kind of like give energy to your like most, I don't know, supportive collector. Just, give them 100% royalties. I don't know. That's kind of the opposite though of like everything. I was just like feeling the stir energy, like what if we just do that like once or twice as artists, especially to someone who's collected like so many times, just like bam, you get 100% royalties, dude, or like 99% and I get 1%. Like I'm cool with that because I don't know, I like the like randomness of it all, so I just wanted to throw that idea out there.
I saw hands shoot up as soon as you said that. So
yeah, I don't know. It's kind of crazy though, right?
I'm not the
like,
artist, so I'll let the artist.
It's a little crazy.
Nothing wrong with a little crazy. Brian Brinkman, will you want to respond first?
Well, I mean, I think Pac did a 100% royalty collection back on Rarible back in the day. I do think there is something to time-based royalties where it's 10% for the first month, and then it goes down to reward people that hold longer. I think there's something interesting there.
Has that been done before, Brian, or is that just an idea you're throwing out?
I think it would have to be manually done.
Okay, interesting.
Where you just kind of go in and change your settings on OpenSea.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure how that would work technologically, but creatively it sounds fun. But technologically, I have no idea how that would work.
I'm actually, not that I really want to open this can of worms, but I'm just going to throw it out there tech-wise. Do artists, like, how do they monitor that they actually did get the royalties? Like, I feel like, especially with Nifty and the Omnibus and all these other things, like, I don't know, was that ever an issue for anybody? Do I even want to ask? But I feel like that was part of my concern at some point.
Third web.
Yeah.
That's your answer. Fucking marketplace at this point. Like, honestly, like, I'm not even gonna lie. If you have a good team behind you, or you know what you're doing in the space, you don't need a marketplace. You don't. You seriously do not need a marketplace. They are just there to work with cohesively, if you can work with cohesively. Other than that, they're just using your name, I think. And that's seriously how I feel about it.
It's a strong mic drop statement. Eddie, do you want to jump in? Go ahead. I saw you on mute.
Yeah, so it is tricky to track royalties. And I remember right after OpenSea first made them optional, a lot of artists didn't actually think it had an effect on them. So unfortunately, I had to show them data that they were getting much less, but it eventually shows up in the big picture of when they see stuff coming into their wallet or not. But to the point about like these dynamic royalties that might change over time, it's very interesting. Maybe somebody has done it, but this stuff does require a bunch of tech, and I do think it creates opportunities. But it's often smart contract stuff, and then you need front-end marketplaces that will then integrate with different smart contracts. And so I've been some conversations about this stuff, but it gets pretty big and complex and costly in ways that are probably challenging to recoup now. But one thing I also just wanted to say was I think that having different points of view and accepting that collectors are going to feel differently. And, I think it's best to just find people who are doing the thing that you like and encourage more of that. And I think trying to shame or yell at the people who don't agree with you, as emotionally satisfying as it might be, I don't think it's going to be very effective. And I think it'll be more likely to get what you want by just rewarding or encouraging or just lending positive support of the things you do. And as an artist, if you want to work on different chains, or I think same way the other way around too. Like I think artists should also put their energies where they want. But I've had a lot of conversations with people about royalties, And there's a lot of really thoughtful people who have very different takes. And I've, come to really appreciate the range of reasonable differences. There's some things that I don't agree with and that I wouldn't help somebody with if they were trying to do, because it doesn't align with what I think. But even within what I think, I've seen pretty different takes and that seem reasonable. And I think supporting that. I also think that the idea about having things sometimes be a bit unpredictable or random, I think people actually having different views, caring about different things, rewarding different stuff, creates more uncertainty. And I think that makes it so that people are less trying to game things. It's not like blur farming where you're just watching, an action is going to lead to more points. I think sometimes just having that uncertainty and differences can actually end up being a positive.
Interesting takes, Eddie, and I definitely agree with you regarding incentivizing good behavior. I'm not a fan at all. Coming from a former teacher, we don't do the shaming and bad behavior. It's really incentivizing the good behavior that I think has the impact. Brian, I did see your hands up. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, just the idea of tracking who pays your royalties. I don't recommend it to anybody because it's a huge time burden, and it'll also probably affect your mental health because you'll start to judge people that say collected your work and paid you a primary money, and then you might go, oh, they didn't pay me royalties, they must not like me, or something like that. That's detrimental to how you should see these people because they did collect your work at some point and support you, and then that's also just crazy because say art blocks, I don't get royalties every time one of those sells. I get it in a quarterly lump sum that they do all the accounting for, and it's a huge burden on them to do that. And I think there's the last thing I'll say is there's something very ironic that Sotheby's, which is one of the more decentralized platform marketplaces in the space, still pays out royalties to the artists on the secondary sales. And there's something very kind of interesting that the trad art world that we tried to get away from is the one that's actually adhering to this ideology more so than the ones that are kind of digitally native.
I love that. And that's actually kind of on a positive note. Okay. Andres, do you want to close us off with the last comment before we wrap it up?
Sure. Two things. I used to track all of my secondary sales through Manifold, and it stopped as soon as the royalties were no longer trackable. That was when the conversation was over, and may have been the last time I used those particular contracts. And then, but on a more positive note, I have found that when it comes to, I make one-of-ones. It's just what I do. I've played around with editions before, but because I make one-of-ones, it's very easy to track where a painting goes and who holds it and who has it. I find that with fine art, once you've actually bought into a piece of unique fine art, in my experience, I may not have the same base of collectors as many people on here, but I've noticed that the work has not changed hands in the 4 odd years that I've been here, except for the exception of maybe 2 pieces, maybe out of the many that I've minted. So for me, it says to me that when you collect a piece of art, you really are living with it. Maybe it's different because I have a physical component because they're oil paintings, but when you live with a piece of art, it becomes a part of you and you really commune with it. And I do see that is the case, at least with my collectors. Whether they would pay me royalties or not, I know that they're being taken care of. There's some sort of exposure that happens with fine art. And I've noticed that even with degens, I think of, I don't know if you can classify Deez as a degen, but he's very much been posting about them, Sam's Masquerade. And the way that he's been posting about his skull is in such a religious and reverent tone, that it's very clear that he knows Sam, that all the people around Sam have been brought in tight for the obvious. But how he treats that particular piece of art is very, very, very different. So I think that with this royalties conversation, there's also another conversation going on about how we treat each other, how we as artists, we're not farming collectors, we're forming relationships that hopefully last a lifetime. And we're really trying to bring in a base of friends that we can bring to the table for as long as we're here in the material world. So that's as good a place to end as any for me. Thank you guys for having the roundtable. It was really, really nice. It was such a pleasure talking to y'all.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone that joined. I do think that was a great place to kind of wrap up the conversation. And, every space we have, I feel like the importance of these connections and meeting collectors in person and like creating these relationships, I feel like comes up every single time and the value that they hold. Yeah, it's awesome. So I guess on that note, we like to end each space with kind of a key takeaway. I mean, I think that is a really strong key takeaway. Just continue building these types of relationships and really focusing on a strong collector base. I think a lot of amazing points were brought up regarding how to incentivize and kind of reward certain behaviors. I know obviously the marketplace conversation came up, but in my opinion, it does come back to creating this culture where we want to be giving royalties and everyone sees the value in them. I do just want to thank Coldy, Brian, HardArt, Plotsky, Julia, everyone that came on stage, Eddie, Andras. Thank you guys for contributing to the conversation. Thank you guys for coming on the third take. I know it took us a while. We got rugged in the beginning, but Milton and I are here every week. We'll be here Wednesday, 1 p.m. Eastern with the next kind of trending conversation. And until then, I hope everyone listening has a great rest of the week. And thank you guys for joining. Milton, I'm curious, what song are you going to DJ us out with? Let's hear it.
What she said. And also, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the music that we played on the intro. You must have heard it because we played it 3 times for 3 intros, but that was Blau. That was a track from 2021 from his platform Royal, which is a Web3 royalty model he built to share 50% of the song's streaming rights to 333 fans via selling the song as a NFT, 333 editions of an NFT. So we'll play another track that he experimented with on that model. It's called Too Late for Love. And I think it's a fitting song to play here on the way out. So looking forward to seeing everybody next week, 1 p.m. Thanks, everybody, for joining. Great discussion. Talk to everybody soon. Touch grass.
Thanks for tuning into Moments the Podcast. If you enjoyed today's conversation, make sure to subscribe and follow us to keep up with all the latest trending Web3 topics. Join us every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern on X for our live space and be a part of the dialogue.